Hi, I'm Chike Coleman, and that's Sanford Hess, and this is Real Reviews Home Edition, the show where we talk about movies from our homes. This week, I could not be more excited to talk about two movies that mean so very much to me. One wasn't made until before I was born, like a year before I was born, and the other has become a cinema classic, and it's only been out 13 years. The first film is Young Sherlock, directed by, I believe, Barry Levinson. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Barry Levinson and written by Christopher Columbus, starring Nicholas Rowe, Sophie Hardy. I don't know what the Watson's name is.
Alan Cox, I saw.
Alan Cox, right. So, Sanford, I don't know if you're a big fan of this movie or not, but take a stab at describing the plot for our audience.
Oh, I will try. Well, I think it's worth noting right off the bat, and the movie tells you that, hey, this is not from any Arthur Conan Doyle story. This is made up. So it's kind of a fantasy story about a young Sherlock Holmes, obviously, meeting a
Mhm.
young Watson. And in fact, the movie starts with us, we start with Watson arriving at a school, and I can't remember why his was closed, but he had to report to a different school, and he meets this very interesting person who has the bed next to him, who turns out to be Sherlock Holmes. So we get to know Sherlock through Watson, and they're both probably in their mid-teens. And Sherlock is definitely a leader of his school. He's the fencing, he's the best fencer, he's smartest, he does very well on his exams, he has everything going for him. And he is also the boyfriend of the one girl on the school grounds who happens to be the niece of this sort of crazy old guy who's a former professor. Well, the movie kind of introduces those characters, but then wraps around them a really weird plot that I'm not even sure I can do justice to. But
Should we
essentially,
try?
yeah, I'll try. The Elizabeth, the girl who Sherlock is attracted to, her uncle was one of a group of people who went to Egypt after their schooling and tried to open a hotel, but wound up stumbling upon a burial ground, which ultimately led to, and this actually found like an interesting plot twist, ultimately led to some kind of a fight in which the British army arrived and wound up burning a village to the ground. It was kind of a heavy moment. So there are some people who believe that these, six or five or six British people who tried to do this hotel 60 years ago are at fault for the loss of their entire village, and those men are being killed off one by one. Well, the game is afoot, and Sherlock is on the case. And the movie kind of moves from there into him delving into the mystery of these Egyptian assassins, which gets pretty silly and becomes kind of a Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom kind of a moment with the crazy ceremonies that they're doing in London underground. But ultimately, the movie is really about Holmes and Watson and learning how the boy who's named Sherlock grows up to become Sherlock Holmes. And, as the movie progresses, he actually gains one after another of the different elements that we associate with the Sherlock Holmes stereotype. There's the hat, there's the pipe and the overcoat. And that was actually some of the more fun parts of it, was sort of recognizing how the character comes together. So I'm not going to really delve into the plot, except to say that the movie does wind up with what is a pretty good ultimate fight scene between Sherlock and the bad guy. Not only is there fencing, but this is the part that I enjoyed. The fight kind of devolves into them grabbing pretty much anything around and hitting each other with it until ultimately they're essentially sort of wrestling across broken ice. So, the movie winds up with this exciting moment. And then as the film ends, we see, and I'm going to give a little bit away, we watch as Sherlock's great love actually dies, setting him on a course of loneliness for the rest of his life, which we know will include much of Dr. Watson. How was
Wow.
that?
Well, well done. Well done, sir. Um, I have loved this movie for a while, since about I think the early 2000s. It was just a really great adventure. No, actually before the early 2000s, so the late 1990s is when I discovered this film. Um, and I loved it because Nicholas Rowe is perfect as Sherlock Holmes, Alan Cox is perfect as Watson, and Sophie is serviceable.
She's
You believe in her intellect,
intriguing.
that she's challenging Holmes in some ways. Kind of, she's not a damsel really. She's equally as smart in her intellect. She just gets herself into scrapes
Right.
until we get to the end, of course, and where
Right.
that scrape is the ultimate sacrifice.
Right. And ultimately, I mean, that's an interesting thing because she actually sort of steps in front of the bullet for Holmes and dies in an incredibly noble way, saving Sherlock
And it's a
Holmes.
beautiful, haunting death that the movie kind of holds on, and I really like that. It's not just, oh, she's dead. I've got to go after the bad guy. He really has a few moments to feel the pain before he goes, okay, now I'm gonna get this dude.
Right. Right. No, and I mean, for a kids movie, also, I thought it was handled sensitively. They could have glossed over that. They could have figured out a way to make it sort of a bloodless death. But, I mean, I thought they did a good job delivering on that plot point. I do feel like they didn't quite do enough with her character, but
No, they didn't.
yeah, it's an 80s movie. You can't expect really an equal amount of plot
It
on.
will not pass the Bechdel test. No way.
No.
Um, Another thing I really liked is the sequences in which the people who are involved die. That's all very clever, and you get the first use of industrial light and magic with a stained glass window knight coming after someone to kill them. Of course, that's all in their head because of a dart that hits them. They feel a little scratch, and then they start hallucinating until they cause their own demise.
Right. Yeah, and let's pause on that for a second because I had never seen this movie, but the one thing I knew about this movie, which you just referenced, is this was the first instance of computer generated animation in a movie besides Star Trek 2, which didn't really count as much. The Industrial Light and Magic and Pixar, who is credited in the credits along with John Lasseter, I saw. They did actually several of the animation sequences, including like the stop motion stuff with the food, where it sort of ganged up on Watson. But
Oh God, I remember that. Ah,
yeah. But
brought back the horrible memory.
there's this famous sequence, like you said, where the priest is hallucinating, the stained glass knight comes down. And that was a really great scene. And I got to give them a lot of credit for really fabulously merging computer generated animation with the live action. So let me kind of key off that for a second. This
Okay.
movie, all right, this movie, that was the only thing I knew about this movie before I saw it, was that one scene and the sort of. But to me now, seeing it and appreciating this film, here we go, to me is a monumental turning point between one technology and another. And I'm going to put an analogy to like the jazz singer or the Wizard of Oz. Those are situations where a new technology was being used or used in a different way and really became a turning point movie. Even if the movie itself is not as good maybe as other ones, it's still, we think about those movies because that's the first time that we had the sound, and that's this first widescreen use of color. And now with this movie, it's a turning point in terms of how movies are made in an old school way versus a new way. And the reason that was struck me so much was watching so many of the scenes where it's just like people on the street with snow falling. It's a very old school style of filmmaking. I mean, big parts of this movie could be made in the 50s in the sense of the way that the film is staged, and you have all these extras walking around and the
Yes,
camera
of
tracks
course.
with somebody. But then you have at the same time these different technologies being used together, fusing these different elements. That's a big deal. And and then obviously let us get into the next 30 years worth of all kinds of craziness of computer generated films. So I think this is an important movie for that alone. Plus,
Now,
like you
aside
said,
from that
yeah,
landmark, did you
go ahead.
like the movie though?
I did. I found it silly at times. I mean, like I said, the whole Egyptian plot really kind of strained any kind of credibility. I also didn't really care for the, you know, I would hate to even call it cultural appropriation because I don't think anybody who's actually Egyptian
Yeah,
would, yeah, I mean, would look at that and say, oh, there's a ceremony that we would, you know, no, no, no. But, you know, you were right about Nicholas Rowe. I mean, he is fabulous as Sherlock Holmes. And I regret greatly that they didn't keep making Sherlock Holmes movies with him all the way through as he aged, a la Harry Potter or something, because he's got it. I mean, and forget about just the looks. He has the diction and the
gravitas.
self-assurance. Yeah, it's great. You know, plus he's a tall guy, you know, in the fencing and stuff like that. He held up really well. So yeah, I mean, I appreciated all those parts of it. But as a Sherlock movie, it was okay because there wasn't really a huge mystery to solve. You know,
I badly, when I saw this for the first time, wanted a sequel.
Yeah.
Like, because now we've established that they're friends and that they trust each other. What are they going to do beyond that?
Right. I mean, and you know, and in fact, it didn't really even do enough with the friendship. I mean, one thing that you don't really come away with the sense of is why does Sherlock Holmes hang out with Watson? You know?
Yeah, that's true.
So it would have been interesting to sort of develop that friendship a little more and understand why these characters are drawn to each other. So that would have been good. And you know, I could have done with a little less of the loopy professor and some of the other stock characters. But you know, I mean, I would say this movie is good for people. Well, this is the tough part because it does have some heavy stuff to it. I mean, the sense of the whole village being wiped out, or when Elizabeth dies. So I can't even recommend it for kids below a certain age because it's kind of heavy. But again, you know, that I think movies in the 70s and 80s were a lot heavier in general in ways that we took for granted then. And now you don't see stuff that dark in a kid's movie. I mean, this was a kid's movie, right?
Yeah.
PG.
I say it's not good for anybody that's not 13 or above.
13's a good
I
age
like
for
this movie a lot. It has a lot of sentimentality to me as a great introduction to Sherlock Holmes and the lore. I think that it deserved many more sequels to actually build upon better plots for these characters. And, you know, I would have loved to see in the second film how Sherlock processes his loneliness of being without the person he loves.
Right.
And how that strengthens his friendship with Watson. Unfortunately, we don't get to see that. But I love this movie, and I think everybody who's 13 and above should see it.
Yeah, and my recommendation is when you see it, which I do recommend, you know, I recommend checking it out. I appreciate the old school manner of this film because, I mean, from the opening credits and the style of the credits, and even just how few people are credited in the opening credits.
Yeah, that's true too.
This is an old school film, and it's an old school film with new technology that, you know, and Barry Levinson, who does, I mean, I'm just watching these scenes of crowd scenes and people walking through. There's a lot of directing that goes on into making those crowd scenes happen. And I really appreciate the filmmaking craft of doing this very simple stuff. I mean, fake snow falling and a guy walking down a fake street, but this is good movie making, and in a way that you don't see, you know, as much anymore because they do have that technological crutch. They can just put that on in post production.
Mm-hmm.
So,
pardon me.
All right.
I agree. From one technological marvel of cinematic achievement, now we move to another. The Dark Knight, directed by Christopher Nolan, written by Christopher Nolan and Jonathan Nolan, starring Maggie Gyllenhaal, Christian Bale, Aaron Eckhart, Heath Ledger, Gary Oldman. Let's see, am I missing anyone?
Michael Caine.
Morgan Freeman, the kid from Game of Thrones, who doesn't really get more than 5 seconds.
That's good enough.
The guy who plays the Scarecrow. Oh, I know this.
Oh, yeah. He was only
the guy who plays the Scarecrow in the first one. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, he was only in for a few moments. So
only in for a few moments, but still worthy tie-in. I can't remember his name. He was in 28 Days Later. But this film, for those of you who've been living under a rock, involves Batman having already cleaned up the city. in the 2 or 3 years since we saw him the last time in Batman Begins. And in that time, the Joker has introduced himself and is causing chaos throughout the entire city. Having known that, Batman isn't really trying to unmask the Joker, he's just trying to stop the chaos that is occurring all around the city. Through that, they're using Harvey Dent as a beacon of light for the city to prosper and be successful. Also, Harvey Dent is dating who Bruce Wayne Batman has loved for all of his life, and he's okay with that. Rachel Dawes, played by Maggie Gyllenhaal, not Katie Holmes, because Katie Holmes sucks. Essentially, those two are an item. Bruce has to be okay with it. He also has to figure out what the game is for the Joker, why he wants to cause the anarchy. And along the way, a bunch of bad things happen. For instance, at some point, the Joker goes in and shows a bunch of gangsters a magic trick. This is about the darkest thing and most violent thing you'll see in this movie, is the magic trick. I mean, he puts together moral quandaries for two boats that are trying to flee the city, and tries to pit them against one another. Of course, we all know that doesn't work. Spoiler alert for you. But it's basically about how a hero can become a villain, and
This city deserves a better class of criminal.
Don't say a villain can become a hero.
yeah. That too.
An anti-hero, maybe. Well, I guess the Joker kind of did become an anti-hero in his own movie eventually.
Yeah.
See yourself become the villain.
And for me, like, that's the best part of it. I was trying to figure out in my head, like, where is this going to go? Because they've done so many different unique things. And I couldn't find an answer for that until I saw it. So the moral quandary of this film is just to figure out what the Joker wants, what his desire is. And that's very easily solved by the fact that he doesn't want anything. He just wants chaos to reign. And Heath Ledger does such a fantastic job at selling that chaos in a role nobody thought he should have. Christian Bale deserves to be credited too, but this is really Heath Ledger's movie to just be as crazy and as inventive as he can be. And credit to the writers for giving the character, who just had been seen as a laughable clown, such diabolical inventiveness that carried not only through, other iterations of the Joker, but just models of the character in the future. I love this movie, clearly. There's a lot to love about it. I'll be quick with my summation here. I think that the best thing about this movie is that if you go into it completely cold, not knowing anything, it's just going to surprise you all the way through. From the opening scene that happens to be a bank robbery to the very end when you're wondering what decision are these people going to make on this boat. I love it for that reason. I love the direction. I love the writing. I love Maggie Gyllenhaal, who gives Rachel much more maturity and much more of a backbone than the first iteration in Batman Begins. Sanford, what did you think of Batman Dark Knight?
Well, it was the first time I'd seen it, I don't know, maybe in 10 years or so, and I watched it with my son. So, last episode we talked about Batman Begins, and my son and I watched it. And so it was interesting because to me, a movie like Dark Knight, you say, okay, they had to get Batman Begins out of the way so that we could have the Dark Knight. You got to tell the story, the backstory first, sure. But, one of the I'm going a little bit of a tangent here. One of the things that frustrates me about like the Spider-Man movies is that each time they have a new Spider-Man, they felt obligated to make the first movie telling us how Andrew Garfield got to be Spider-Man, when all we really wanted to do was get past that stupid story so that you could have the really cool Spider-Man stories. And that's how this movie was. I mean, okay, good. We've established that, Bruce Wayne is Batman. Cool. He's got all this stuff. Now let's tell a really great story. And this one, I mean, you're right. This movie nails it from start to finish. And to me, it's all about Heath Ledger. This movie, now my son, I think it had been built up so much and people talking about this movie that he felt like Heath Ledger, he's like, oh, he only got the Oscar because he died. And I'm like, no.
No.
This is a performance for the ages that he gives. I mean, I even liked it better than Joaquin Phoenix's, Joker. And
Shots fired. Shots
yeah,
fired.
yeah. I mean, he's just out there on so many levels, and it's fabulous. It's fabulous how he does. But also, I'm glad you mentioned it too. I mean, I appreciate Christian Bale's performance. As Batman, he's okay. I mean, Batman's kind of a tough character to, I mean, he's so dark and just, I'm talking so deep, whatever. But I love Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne. I love the scenes where he's playing up the dumb rich boy character in order to achieve his own goals as Batman. I just love that.
My favorite moment that's a Bruce Wayne moment within the film is when Bruce has to stop that. I don't know whether you call him a banker, but he's a Wayne Enterprises employee who knows the identity of Batman and will be killed by half the city if
the Joker announces that if he's not killed in an hour, that bad things are going to happen. We'll just leave it at that.
Right. And when he uses that really sweet card to just interrupt the death of that guy, I'm just like, I want that car. But it's what he would do. He would be that irresponsible going 110 miles an hour. And it would be the perfect cover to try and save somebody else.
Yeah. It's just, he does a great job playing. Now, I will say this. I am not as much a fan of Maggie Gyllenhaal's performance in this one as you are.
You like Katie Holmes better?
I don't think Maggie Gyllenhaal is really into the comic book movie role. And I think that comes across that she never really buys into this role and never really buys into the point of her performance. She plays it a little too straight. And it's just, I don't know. Her scenes just are kind of blah.
Okay. My one sentence rebuke to that is the character wasn't meant to have edge.
Well, but like you said, she has more spine than Katie Holmes in this one. So, I mean, she has a little edge, but I just felt like her performance is flat.
Okay.
Okay.
So you would recommend this film, right?
Oh my God, of course. This is a modern classic, right? And it's a modern classic because it is really, truly that good. I mean, even for people who are not used to superhero movies, people who would be, you say, oh, that's so lame. I want art. I want performances. I want writing. This movie has performances. This movie has writing. This movie has art. I mean, there are wonderfully shot scenes that are just people talking, and you don't have action all the whole movie. It's just the camera and the camera loves Heath Ledger in this movie. I mean, Christopher Nolan did such a great job shooting him in those scenes where he's interacting with the other gangsters. Without Batman, just the bad guys by themselves. I love those scenes. He really is fabulous. So yeah, this movie I recommend without doubt. Now, the one tough thing is, this becomes like, it's the classic, how do you top your performance? How do you top your this wonderful film? And I think that's something that Christopher Nolan kind of suffered with a little bit, especially where do you go from there?
We might get into that on the next episode.
I think we might have to.
We might have to.
All right. So, hey, say some, obviously it's always good to just, find some points of, critique in any film. So, what did you, in rewatching The Dark Knight, what were you struck by maybe that you didn't quite appreciate as much?
Alfred was a really good father figure in the first film, and I didn't really see him do much of that in the second. And I would have liked to see that more because that bond is crucial. It's the only real tie Bruce has to being just Bruce. Not Bruce Wayne, Bruce.
Right.
And I missed that here. I also think that seeing more of Harvey Dent as Harvey and seeing him maybe possibly lose control before the transformation would have made more sense to me. Or at least that's how I've always envisioned it, because my knowledge of Two-Face came from the cartoons.
Right.
So seeing a little bit more of how people have tipped him over to the edge before in different ways would have helped. It would have been nice for us to understand why the police became in such support of Batman, or at least blissful ignorance to what he was doing. Those are the kinds of flaws that I see. Is there anything that you pick up on?
No, but I think you touched on something really important with the Harvey Dent. The transformation from Harvey Dent into Two-Face is too sudden and is too it doesn't feel organic enough. I mean, I felt like they could have dwelled on that. They could have explained how he kind of, how he got so dark, because ultimately, it's a very quick transformation. And then we just have, if there's anything about this movie that, to me is it sort of drags on a little bit, it's those last scenes with Two-Face and Chief Gordon's family.
I'm going to say one thing.
What's that?
I feel like the Two-Face transformation was just grief talking.
Well, he lost Rachel, but it's hard to go from the grief of losing Rachel to all of a sudden, turning so dark.
A man who kills.
Yeah. And I do want to say, a lot of great plot twists in this movie, and I don't want to ruin them all for the audience, but the one that I really did enjoy was the racing to save Rachel and Harvey Dent. I just really, that's such a classic Joker move to, essentially
switch the addresses just to mess with.
Yes. That was just a really, the moment when Batman shows up and it's Harvey Dent, you just, and it's almost, they maybe even didn't dwell on it enough. I mean, there really should have just been that moment of crushing realization, like, oh, Joker, that kind of thing.
That would have been played.
That's not a very Batman thing to do, though. Joker. Sorry.
Then we turn that movie into a comedy. It wouldn't have sold as well. It broke almost $1 billion.
Right. Yeah, I got to rave about this movie some more. I mean, this movie also has some really cool heist scenes. Not just the opening scene, which is really cool, but also Batman going to Hong Kong to essentially steal this person. I love that.
That's great.
Yeah. Takes the Russian ballet company. So this movie is just, on so many levels, it really hits on all cylinders. And I can't say enough about, seeing, I always say there's different, every genre that you can have good and bad of any genre, right? And so, there's good and bad horror, there's good and bad, talking movie, there's good and bad documentary. This is an excellent comic book movie, and it's so good that it elevates it to, most people who would never dream of watching a comic book movie would really enjoy this. I mean, I would sit and show this to even the most hardcore cinema artiste, and I think they would walk away saying that was a good movie.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say that's my favorite quote of the movie is, it comes from Michael Caine, and he's like, "What Russian for put on your own bloody suntan lotion?" I love that. Dumb insignificant line, but it's great.
Yeah, but you got to wonder, why is Michael Caine not into putting suntan lotion on these Russians?
I mean, have you seen Blame It on Rio? He shouldn't be complaining.
All right, on that horribly misogynistic note, what are we? Do you have thoughts for next week? Do you want to tell the audience or just tease them?
I do. Audience, next week we are pushing into December, so I wanted to have a movie to celebrate that. And the movie I have to celebrate is kind of in between great and awful, depending on how you look at it. It's called Fat Man. We go from Batman to Fat Man. And I would say we'll finish off the Dark Knight trilogy next week, but we may do something else. We'll see. And until next time, I'm Chike Coleman, and that's Sanford Hess. We will see you all next week. Bye, guys.